Well, good morning. Good morning. Today, we are in the second message of a new series that I've entitled Life According to Jesus. Life According to Jesus. And in this message series, we're taking a look at what Jesus has to say about how to live our lives. Now, in the Gospels are the first four books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospels are the books of the New Testament that talk about the life of Jesus. And in the first Gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, one of the very first teachings that Jesus gives is something that we call the Sermon on the Mount. And in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives what I consider the foundation of what a Christian life should look like. That if you want to look in the Bible and say, what should my life as a follower of Jesus look like? I think the Sermon on the Mount is a great example of that. And last week, in our first message of this series, we started in an unusual place. We started at the end of the sermon. Usually, the pastor, I was told when I was learning how to preach that the pastor has to have a couple of things for a good sermon. He said, I was told you need to have a good opening. You need to have a good beginning. Excuse me, let me say that again. I messed up my joke. Okay, for those of you online, my jokes are lame anyway, but, we'll try it again. I was taught when I was learning how to preach the keys to a great sermon. You need to have a good beginning, a good ending, and you need to keep them as close together as possible. Okay? I'm still working on those, okay, especially the keeping it close together thing. But last week we started at the end of the message, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus closed it in a great way. And basically at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus basically said this. He said, hey, if you listen to these words that I just spoke, and you put them into practice. In other words, if you do the things that I just talked about, your life will be like somebody who built their house on a rock, something with a solid foundation. And when the storms of life come along, the wind and the waves beat against that house, but because it had a solid foundation, it stood. He said, but if you don't do the things that I just talked about, if you only listened to me and you didn't put it into practice, you're going to be like somebody who built their house on the sand, a bad foundation. And when the wind and the waves came and they beat against that house, it eroded the foundation and that house collapsed. And so what we're going to be doing starting today and in the next several weeks, we're going to be taking a look at these teachings that Jesus gave. We're going to be taking a look at what Jesus says is necessary for that solid foundation, so when we face those storms of life, that we're able to stand. So we're starting at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 1. It says this: Now when meaning Jesus, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, these 12 verses are known as the Beatitudes, okay? And that begs the question, what in the world is a beatitude? It's not a word that we use. Well, the word beatitude has its root in a Latin word that literally means blessed. Okay, so these are the blessed verses. Now, the dictionary defines the word beatitude like this. It says a beatitude means supreme blessedness or happiness. In other words, if I want to be supremely blessed, if I want to be supremely happy, do these things that Jesus just mentioned. And really, the Beatitudes are nothing more than cause and effect. Jesus said, if you do this, this will happen. You know, we're faced with cause and effect all the time. If I go to work on time and I do my job, then I'll get a paycheck. You know, if my wife puts a pizza in front of me, I will eat it. This cause and effect, okay? If you do this, then this will happen, okay? We're fully aware of that. And as we're taking a look at this cause and effect, it kind of goes against what we commonly know in society today, what is commonly taught. And I'll speak on that here a little bit more as we get into this. But we're going to start with the first Beatitude in Matthew 5:3, which says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." In other words, happy are the poor in spirit. So Jesus is saying that if you are poor in spirit, that you will be blessed, you will be happy, and that the kingdom of heaven will be yours. Now, what does Jesus mean by poor in spirit? And when Jesus says poor in spirit, he's not talking about our financial situation. It's not like, well, blessed are the poor in spirit. Hey, I'm broke. I'm really blessed, And that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about our spiritual condition. To be poor in spirit means that we take a look at our spiritual condition and we see it for what it is. It's poor. Now, I know some of you might think, wait a minute, Pastor Harry, what do you mean my spiritual condition is poor? You don't really know what my spiritual life is like. And you're right. I can't really know for sure what your spiritual life is like. I don't. I can guess. I can look at the evidence that I see and assume, but I don't know for sure. And I know that some of us that are listening to this message are very close to God. Some of us are not. Some listening to this message may be an agnostic or an atheist or somebody of another faith, okay? And so, we may not be exactly where we need to be spiritually. But no matter how close we are to God, no matter how well we are fulfilling his call in our life, I think that if we were totally honest, we would admit that we still have a long way to go. That yes, I am way further in my relationship with God now than I was 35 years ago when I first started to follow Jesus. My faith has grown, it's matured, I've gotten way closer to God. But I've discovered that the closer I get, the further away I realize I am. You ever notice that? Like, remember when you were a teenager and knew everything? No insult intention for the teens in this room. Someday when you have teenage children of your own, you will know exactly what I mean, okay? So you're both awesome. Don't be insulted on this. But for the parents in this room, the aunts and the uncles in this room, people who have dealt with teenagers, remember when we were teenagers and we thought we knew everything? Oh, man, life was so much easier then, wasn't it? I was so dumb, I didn't even know how dumb I was. I had life by the tail. Man, it was great. I was bulletproof, and yeah, that stuff might happen to somebody else, but it's not going to happen to me. Nope, I'm smarter than that. Yeah, anyway. But then I started to grow up. No, I haven't totally grown up. Don't ever plan to. Yes? Oh, okay, I've got a power cord right there. Brenda will help you out with that. I forgot to plug the laptop in that is we're using for our live broadcast, so oops. Yes, that's why Carter's got the helm right there at our live broadcast machine. So, we'll wait for him to get that plugged in. All right, there we go. All right. So as I was saying, when I was a teenager, I thought I knew everything. But then I started to grow up a little bit. The more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. The more I learned, the smarter I realized my dad actually was. In fact, I remember one day when I went to my dad, I was probably about 23 or 24, and I said, "Dad, have you been taking night classes or something?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, because a couple of years ago, you were an idiot. You didn't know anything, okay? But I'm starting to realize you're a pretty smart guy. You've got a lot of wisdom to share. It must be night classes or something, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, right, yeah, night classes." But I apologized to him for being such a pain, and he gave me a big hug, said, hey, I knew you'd grow out of it sooner or later. And still haven't totally, but at least I got to that place where I realized I didn't know it all. And that's what it means to be poor in spirit, to realize we don't have it all together spiritually. You know what I mean? Our spiritual life is a process. It's a growing process. We will never reach full maturity in our spiritual life. We will always be lacking in some area. There will always be something else we need to learn, somewhere else that we need to grow in our life. There will always be something I believe that God is going to be dealing with me in my life as I grow and mature in my faith. Being poor in spirit is admitting your condition. Now remember our 12-step faith series? Step 1, admitting you got a problem, right? That's step 1. Not admitting my poor spiritual condition results in pride. And pride is basically saying, I don't need anybody, I can do this on my own. God, I don't need you, I got it under control. Well, Scripture has a lot to say about pride. I need to humble myself. Say, God, I can't do this on my own. I need your help. I'm poor in spirit. And if I admit that, and if I submit to God, Scripture says, the kingdom of heaven is mine. I get to participate. I get to be there. This brings us to our next beatitude. We find this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. It says this, it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, at first, this sounds utterly ridiculous. Most of us in this room know what it's like to mourn. Most of us in this room have experienced grief. And anytime I've been grieving or mourning, I most definitely have not felt blessed. You know what I mean? In fact, blessed is the last thing I am feeling when I'm in the middle of that. Mourning is no fun at all. Why would anybody want to mourn? Why would God want us to mourn? Well, there are 3 basic types of mourning, and we need to understand these 3 different types of mourning to really understand what this beatitude is talking about. And the first type of mourning is something called deficiency mourning. And this is a mourning caused by a loss. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Somebody very special and close to you has passed away. Maybe it's a pet that you are particularly close to. Maybe it was a pet that you didn't think you were close to, but realized you were. When my wife and I bought our house, it came with a basset hound. And the folks that had the house before us, they couldn't take the basset hound with them, and so they said, would you take the dog? And of course, yeah, sure, we'll take the dog. And my wife never really was too much of a fan. I mean, she took care of the dog, of course, but just, I don't know, just didn't really warm up to the dog too much. But then there was one day, my wife saw that she was having an issue, the dog was having an issue, and came running over to the office, like really upset. You need to help the dog. You need to help the dog. And the dog was tied out and had gotten its chain wrapped around some kind of stick, and it was choking the dog. And I could see the emotion in my wife. And she's like, I guess maybe I love this dog more than I thought. And thankfully, I was able to untangle things, and the dog was fine. And Brenda didn't think she was close to that dog, but she realized she was. And if something would have happened to that dog, she would have been devastated. Anybody that's ever had a pet that's been close to them, you know exactly what I mean when I say it's devastating to lose a pet. Maybe it's the loss of a job or a friend. Maybe it's the loss of health. Maybe it's the loss of a possession that was really special to you. We all have those things that, as far as monetary value, they don't really, they're not worth a whole lot as far as money is concerned. But the emotional value, the emotional attachment you have to them makes them priceless. I have my granddad's chainsaw. If I were to sell it right now, I might be able to get $10 out of it. Doesn't even run. Yeah, maybe $10. I don't know if I could even sell it. Doesn't even run. But I tell you, you can't afford it. You can't afford it. If my house was on fire and my family was out and I could run in and just grab a couple things, that's one of the things I'd grab. To some, it's just a chainsaw. To me, it means everything. And if I lost it, I'd be mourning. That's a deficiency mourning. But this is not the kind of mourning that Jesus was talking about. We have another kind of mourning that I'm quite familiar with that is called blunder mourning. You flub your dub and it makes you sad. That ever happened to anybody here? Or is it just me? Yeah, exactly. Everybody here. Blunder mourning. We've all experienced this. You know, it's, you know, you made a wrong choice, you made a mistake, and something very bad happens because of that blunder that you made. Okay? And again, we've all experienced this, but again, this is not the kind of mourning that Jesus is referring to. So, what kind of mourning is Jesus talking about? He's talking about spiritual mourning. Mourning that is caused by our own sin. Remember the first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, referring to accurately viewing our spiritual condition? Well, here's where the blessed are those who mourn come in. See, we all realize that we fall short. We all realize that we have issues to deal with. And the question is, though, once you realize what your issues are, what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with them? Do we ignore them and treat them like they don't exist? I know people that have done that. Or they fully realize there's an issue, but they ignore it, hoping it'll go away. Or do we do something about it? See, I know that there are things in my life that I will battle with until the day I die. Now, I pray that I'll be delivered. I pray that I will grow. But there are some things that wouldn't surprise me a bit if I struggle until the day I die with a couple of the issues that I face. Other ones, you know, I take care of an issue in my life and it's no longer an issue. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus, that you helped me overcome that. And Jesus said, yep, I helped you overcome that one. Now here's the next one I want you to work on. Oh, man, I didn't even realize that, you know. So, I mean, there will always be things, okay? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to give up, which is really easy to do. When the struggle seems hopeless, when you've done everything you know how to do and you still are struggling, boy, it's easy to give up. Say, man, I can't kick this thing, so might just as well give in. No. Because once you've done everything that you know how to do, that's when you realize that you can't do it. That's where step 2 in our 12-step program comes in. Realize that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I can't do it, but God can. And if I realize my condition and I realize that I can't do anything about it, I'm not going to coddle that sin. I'm going to turn it over to God who can do something about it. And it says that if I mourn, if I have that spiritual mourning, I will be comforted. I will be blessed. God will help me move to that next stage in life that I need to be. I will never survive the storms of life by coddling my sin or by trying to do it on my own. I will survive. I will be blessed. I will overcome. I will be comforted if I turn it over to God and allow Him to work in my life. Beatitude number 3 is found in verse 5 of Matthew chapter 5. And it says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And again, this is another instruction that kind of goes against the grain of society. Because in this society, who are the people that seem to be inheriting the earth? The powerful. Those who aren't afraid to step on others to get to the top. Those who aren't afraid to do whatever it means, even if it means lying, cheating, and stealing, to be successful. You know, they'll do whatever it takes. Power is where it is. But this says, blessed are the meek. See, society says the more that we are willing to manifest our powers and express ourselves and take advantage of our abilities, the more likely we are to succeed. Being meek just doesn't seem to fit in to society today. You know, and it really wasn't much different back in Jesus' day. When Jesus spoke the words, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," I'm sure that there were more than a few eyebrows raised in the crowd that he was in. Why? Because remember, they were in Roman-occupied Israel. The Roman Empire was in control of Israel. They had conquered Israel. And Israel wanted nothing more than to kick Rome out. How do you kick out the most powerful army in the world? Certainly not by being meek. So when Jesus said, "The meek will inherit the earth," they're like, huh? Wait, no. The Messiah is going to come. He's going to raise up an army. We're going to kick their butt, and he's going to establish a kingdom that will never end. That's not the way it goes. What do you mean, blessed are the meek? Blessed are the meek. Now, the first thing we need to do is understand what the word meek really means. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the word meek, the first thing I picture is some 90-pound wimpy mama's boy. You know what I mean? Okay. Now, how many of you would be threatened if you ran into this guy on a dark street after at night? I don't know that I'd be too threatened by somebody like that. I don't know. I just probably wouldn't feel very threatened at all. And that's kind of what we picture when we hear the word meek. But that's not the case. As is the case with most spiritual issues, society is very mistaken when it comes to meekness. You see, because meekness is not weakness. Meekness is power under control. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is power under control. What do I mean by that? Well, picture in your mind a dad wrestling with his 5 or 6-year-old child. Virtually all dads have done that. A lot of moms have done that. So, just picture my son Josiah when he was like 4 or 5 years old, and him and I wrestling on the living room floor. I think I could take him. Yeah, not even a contest. If this was a real wrestling match, he wouldn't stand a chance. It would last seconds. I was significantly stronger than him. But I kept my power under control. What did I do? Same thing most parents do when they're wrestling with their kids. You let them win. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah, every once in a while you'd hold them down and tickle them until they almost wet their pants just because that's fun, okay? That's part of the game, all right? But you let them win. You know why? Because that's what a loving parent does. They have power, but it's power under control. That is what meekness is. 2 Corinthians 10:1 describes Jesus as being meek and gentle. And as you look at scriptures, I think this is a very accurate description of Jesus' character. I mean, think about the miracles Jesus did. Scripture says that when Jesus was hanging on the cross, that he could have spoken the word and 10,000 angels would have come to his rescue. You think about how powerful those angels are. Okay, again, just think about this for a second. In the story of the Exodus, the final plague that was given on Egypt, one angel in one night went through the nation of Egypt and killed the firstborn in every Egyptian household. That was one angel, one night. Imagine what 10,000 angels could do if they wanted to. Completely destroy the planet. Jesus had access to that power, aside from the fact that Jesus is God, but he kept that power under control. If anybody deserved to strut around all pride-filled on earth and demand people serve him, it was Jesus. But what did he do? He was meek. He was gentle. When he hung on the cross, he didn't call those angels. What did he do? He said, "Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." He was meek. The night before he was crucified, he was praying in the garden, and he was asking, God, is there any other way? Because he knew what was coming. He knew the cross was coming. He's like, I don't really want to do this, but it's not about me, God. It's not my will, but yours be done. See, being meek is saying, God, I realize it's not about me. It's about your will for my life. It's about what you want me to do. It's about loving you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's about loving my neighbor as I love myself. That is what it's about. And it says if I'm meek, if I submit myself to God, if I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, if I love my neighbor as myself, if I do everything I can to be the best follower of Jesus that I know how to be, it says I'm going to inherit the earth. It's pretty awesome. Now, does that mean I'm going to be the ruler of the world? No, not at all. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure exactly what inherit the earth means, but it sounds really good, and I'd like to experience it. You know? Sounds really good. Would love to experience it. And our final beatitude today is found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. It says this, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Now, we're getting close to noon here today. We've got a fellowship meal after the service, and I know how good of a cook most of you are. I'll admit, I'm a little hungry. But I'm not desperate. I could go for a few hours. In fact, probably wouldn't hurt me at all to go for a day or two. You know, I could live off the fat of the land for weeks, as they say, all right? You know, I get hungry. In fact, I've even gone so far as to say, oh, man, I'm starving. But am I really? No, I'm not really starving. I'm just really hungry. I don't know what starving feels like. I don't know what it's like to be incredibly hungry. I don't know what it's like to be near the point of death. But this is the picture that Jesus is describing here. People who hunger and thirst. Now, most of us have probably experienced this. You ever experienced a time where you are so thirsty that all you can think about is getting something to drink? All you can think about is a nice tall glass of iced tea or water or lemonade or Mountain Dew or whatever it is that you like to drink to take care of your thirst. You know, big old tall glass of ice water for me. Oh man, it's all you can think about. And this is what it's talking about. Blessed are those who are desperate, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. If all I can think about, if all I am seeking after, if all I'm waiting for is righteousness, it says I will be filled. So that brings up the question, what is righteousness? Well, here's something that's kind of interesting. Oftentimes, when you see the word righteousness in Scripture, the root word in the original Greek can also be translated as justice. And that's the way it is here. It can mean righteousness. It can also mean justice. So those who are hungering and thirsting after righteousness, which righteousness literally means morally upright, without guilt or sin. I'm pursuing a life that is as sin-free as possible, okay? But it can also mean justice. What's justice? Justice is getting what you deserve. Now, we often see that in a negative light. I commit a crime, I get punished, that's justice. You know, if I steal something from the store, I get arrested. That's justice. I speed, I get pulled over, I get a ticket. That's justice. But it can also mean something good. You know, you work, you get your paycheck, you get paid what you should be paid. That's justice. That's a positive thing. Here in a few weeks, a lot of us are going to be working on our taxes. Now, hopefully this year I paid in more than what I needed to, and I'll get a refund. I like tax refunds. You get a little bit of unexpected money that comes in. I paid too much, I get a refund. That's justice, and I like that. But if I didn't pay enough and I have to pay in, that's still justice because I owe them. You know what I mean? So this is talking about blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. So what could that mean? You look around the world, Do you see any injustices going on? A lot. As much as I wish it weren't true, racism is alive and well in the United States today. And it's dumb. Why in the world would you judge somebody for something they have no control over? I had no control over being born white. I had no control over being born male. I had no control over being born in the United States to a middle-class family that loved me. I had no control over that. None. So why in the world would I judge somebody who's not white, who's not male, who's not from the U.S., who's not in my economic strata, who might be lower income or upper income or somebody different? Why would I judge them for something they can't control? You know what I'm saying? I can't control how I was raised, but I can control how I raise my kids. You know what I mean? So if I see an injustice like racism going on, I should probably stand up and do something if I'm able. If I see sexism going on, I should probably stand up and do something. If I see somebody being judged, period, for something they shouldn't be judged for, I should still probably stand up and do something. Even if I see somebody who's on the opposite side of the political spectrum that I am on. And you know what I mean? We all know those people who, if you believe one thing politically, they believe the exact opposite. If they believe the exact opposite of me politically, yet they are being treated unfairly in the political realm, I should stand up for them as well, even though I don't agree with them. If a cult wanted to build a church building here in the Liberty area, and people were saying, no, you can't do that, I really would think that I would have to say, yeah, they kind of can, because in the United States, we are granted freedom of religion. And if you prevent them from building their building, what would be preventing me from building a new church building someday? If you shut down them just because you don't believe what they believe, just because you think they are wrong, then what's to say you're not going to be shut down? That's justice. I need to stand up for what is right. And maybe, just maybe, by standing up for what is right, I can show somebody the love of Jesus. Maybe I can open a door to share my faith with them. Now let's go and talk about the righteousness angle for a second, the morally upright, without guilt or sin. See, too many Christians have a warped idea about righteousness and what that really means, because to many, righteousness is following a long list of do's and don'ts, mostly don'ts. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Don't drink, smoke, or chew, or hang out with those who do, but go to church regularly, put in the offering, read your Bible, and pray every day, and then you'll be okay. This whole long list of do's and don'ts. And that actually doesn't have much to do with righteousness at all. Because I can do all the right things and not do all the wrong things, but still not have a relationship with God. If I don't have that relationship with God, it doesn't matter what I do. My soul is still in trouble. If I'm doing all the right things and not doing all the wrong things, all I am is a well-behaved heathen without Jesus. Righteousness starts with Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that there's not standards for our Christian life. Absolutely there are. What are those standards? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. See, before I do something, I need to stop and think, okay, is what I'm about to do, is this loving God? Is this giving God the love that God deserves? And if the answer is yes, then fine, great. Go ahead and do it. If the answer is no, then I shouldn't do it. If the answer is I don't know, well then, if it's something that you really need to pray about it and ask God, is this something that I should do that would show me loving you? For some things, it doesn't really matter. Like if I'm trying to decide what kind of sandwich I want for lunch, I don't know that God really cares. You know what I mean? That's really not an issue. But if what I'm about to do is not loving God, then it's a sin and I shouldn't do it. What about loving my neighbor as myself? If what I'm about to do is not loving my neighbor as I love myself, then I shouldn't do it. That's a sin. And if you look at any of the things that the Bible calls a sin in the New Testament, it boils down to loving God and loving our neighbor. I can do the right thing with the wrong motives, and it's wrong. If I do the right thing for you because I want you to do something for me, it's really not love, is it? But maybe I try to do the right thing for you out of love. And in the process, I mess up and I end up doing the wrong thing. I mean, I've done that before. My motives were pure. I wanted to do the right thing for my wife. But I ended up doing something that was not the right thing. I messed up. It happens. But my wife knew that I was doing it out of love, and even though I totally messed up, still okay, because she knew what my motive was. That's the righteousness that this is talking about. Seeking after doing what is right. Loving God, loving our neighbor. And the opposite of righteousness is self-righteousness. And there's a huge difference. God's righteousness is relying on God. Self-righteousness is relying on me. It's another word for pride. What does the Bible have to say about that? Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 says, "For it's by grace that we've been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." That's the New International Version, but I love how the God's Word translation puts it. This is a great translation. It says, "God saved you through faith as an act of kindness. You had nothing to do with it. Being saved is a gift from God. It's not the result of anything you've done, so no one can brag about it." In other words, salvation is a gift. We cannot earn it on our own. Nothing you say or do can earn you God's love. He already loves you as much as he can, right where you are. God already loves you. There's nothing you could ever do to make him love you less. Now, that doesn't mean that God always approves of what we do. Certainly not. It doesn't mean that God's always proud of what we do. Definitely not. That doesn't mean that if I do something wrong, there's not consequences. I mean, that's part of what love is, right? Any parent that loves their child knows that bad behavior equals negative consequences. Because if my child never faces negative consequences, they're going to grow up to be a brat. There needs to be negative consequences for negative behavior. That's love. Okay? Nothing I could ever do would make God love me less. But that doesn't mean there's not certain behaviors that are expected of us as followers of Jesus. However, as a follower of Jesus, those things should come naturally to us as our relationship with him improves. As my relationship with God improves, the natural outpouring of that should be the right things. But here's the reality. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I love the fact that God doesn't say, "Blessed are those who attain righteousness." No, he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Here's what this tells me. It tells me that the blessing comes in the desire, not necessarily in the results. Let me say that again. The blessing from God in this beatitude comes from my desire, not necessarily the results. I'm not perfect, and no matter how hard I try, I'm going to mess up. That's not an excuse. It's a fact. But if I hunger and thirst after righteousness, if I pursue righteousness, I will be blessed regardless of the results of that pursuit. So, let's recap our progression through the Beatitudes so far. Blessed are the poor in spirit. We need to humble ourselves before God. We need to admit that we have an issue called sin. We need to admit that we have this problem. We fall short of God's standards. Blessed are those who mourn. We need to realize that we cannot overcome these sins, these shortcomings on our own. That we need to identify these shortcomings and hand them over to God, who's able to do something about it. Blessed are the meek. We need to be willing to submit to God and to follow his will for our life. And finally, Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice. Our primary goal should be a right relationship with God. See, when we know that a storm is coming, we want to be prepared, right? Yeah, we're in the middle of winter right now. If we get that storm warning that, oh yeah, we're going to have possibly 20 inches of snow by tomorrow. Well, what do? You make sure you got enough stuff in case you need to stay in the house for a few days. Got to get bread and milk. You know what I mean? All right? Now just make sure that we got enough stuff, whatever it is that we feel that we need to prepare for this. While we're preparing for storms of life. We don't know when they'll come. We don't know what they'll look like, but we need to be prepared. How can we be prepared? By being poor in spirit, by mourning, by being meek, and by hungering and thirsting after righteousness. These are 4 of the 8 Beatitudes. And next week, we'll continue our look in the Beatitudes. Let's go ahead and pray. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the message, please click on the like button below, as well as the subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates. If you found this message particularly enjoyable, please feel free to share it with anyone that you think might be blessed. If you'd like more information about our church or have any questions, you can contact us on our website at www.harvestfamilyfellowship.com.